A cold morning settled over the prison gates while two guards traded whispers about a notorious inmate, rumored to be a former mob boss. A lighter snapped to life in a rough hand as he muttered that loyalty and respect meant nothing now that nobody came to visit. One guard wondered aloud why the warden himself was seeing off the mysterious visitor. An older officer turned to the newcomer and asked Kim if this was his first time at Chingsong. A uniformed man glanced up, cautious, as another stepped onto the wooden platform above, polished black shoes catching the dim light. A bearded man paused with a cigarette at his lips, saying they owed that man a debt even if it sounded strange. A man in a cap told the guy in the suit that a thug stays a thug, no matter how sharp the suit. A calm man with a top knot held his cigarette and said he had something to add. He suggested the real problem might lie somewhere else. Two tense figures leaned into the dark. The younger watched the older with open suspicion. A suited man glared down, convinced someone would toss away right and wrong for quick cash. A long-haired man insisted Young Buldo wasn't like the new wave crowd. The man in the black cap pushed back, saying the older guy was romanticizing the old guard. A criminal's still a criminal. Rain pooled around their shoes as the man in the suit quietly told the officer this rainy season might linger, and people were strangers to one another. Young Buldo, weary and unkempt, quietly thanked Warden Lee for everything. He told them to forget it and just focus on staying out of trouble. 2 months slipped by and the calm sky over Jongno's Tapgal Park was broken only by a distant, rhythmic clack. Stones on the go board. Jongno's one Tapgal Park was broken only by a spectator distant, breathed, divine, and another snapped that nobody asked for commentary. Someone pointed out a spot to a man named Kim, who asked exactly where they meant. A man in a headband challenged someone for his age, while an unseen voice politely invited them to enjoy their meal. An older man demanded respect for his years, but the staffer waved him off and called for the next in line. In the crowded market, a furious man threw down a challenge, demanding to settle it right now. A bowl of soup hit the floor with a hard thud, someone shouting in panic over their lost meal. A pot burst open, food flying, while a voice off to the side cursed that the meal was ruined. Young Buldo, fierce eyes under his cap, threatened to punish whoever ruined the last batch. A stern man in an orange apron locked onto the boy in the blue cap, warning he just volunteered for a beating. The kid in the blue cap trembled, begging the shadowed figure to stop. The furious man barked that someone needed to stop now. A cheerful young woman with dark hair burst into laughter beneath a cloudy sky. Anxious and sweating, a man ordered everyone to shake hands and get along from now on. The weary, thoughtful man let out a long, tired sigh. A solitary man studied the box in his hands, pensive, while another figure passed carrying his own burden. Overhead, the park bustled, people moving, two cats roaming, while a sharp-eyed young man watched it all. A hand offered a sealed meat pack as an eager cat moved in, meowing for a taste. The alert cat kept meowing for attention, while a silent, contemplative man just watched. Young Buldo leaned in with a blue container, explaining cats shouldn't eat just anything. They need the right treats. A stern voice reminded everyone that smoking wasn't allowed in the park. A considerate woman offered a can to the man with the cigarette, suggesting he take this instead. A calm mentor with gentle eyes handed something to the eager girl. She told him to pass it forward. It belonged to her now. A shocked, cautious man gingerly tugged a poison dart from his mouth as a calm woman asked his name and introduced herself, Sia Park. A shocked young woman glanced over and asked if what he was holding was even good for him. A serious young man listened as someone asked how he started volunteering and why he wasn't drinking. A playful girl with short black hair asked if he'd have preferred an energy drink over canned coffee. She glanced over and asked why Young Buldo was so quiet, reminding him he'd chatted easily with the cat earlier. Calm and contemplative, Young Buldo popped open the blue Let's Begin Outdoors. He took a sip from the blue-labeled can and murmured that things aren't so easy when you're older, even if they look simple to the young. Young Buldo listened while the girl confirmed what she just said. The girl with braids suddenly realized why Young Buldo was here. A surprised young woman turned her head and called out to someone nearby. Someone asked if he'd really been a famous gangster. Young Buldo focused hard, the glowing orbs on his forehead pulsing with energy. A stubbled chin dipped as he quietly asked if things had changed for good. A young woman laughed, saying her dad believed true happiness belongs to those who laugh from the heart. A cheerful girl told the bearded man he should shave when he gets the chance, then nodded at her own advice and moved on. A black-haired young woman hesitated, admitting there was more she wanted to say. Someone quietly admitted her father had once been a gangster, saying that memory surfaced after meeting young Boldo. A man casually handed over a colorful card, mentioning his family owned the Mandarin Eater. Young Boldo studied the note, considering the invite to try jampong at the Mandarin Eater. With a bright wave, a cheerful girl told him she was heading out. An upset girl snapped, demanding what the smiling girl had been thinking. The two cheerful girls darted ahead, laughing as one insisted she'd only plugged their restaurant. Besides, he wasn't a gangster anymore. A weathered man took a slow sip and murmured that the young today were something else. A jet carved through the blue, engines roaring while the world below waited for what came next. Weary, thoughtful eyes on the ground, young Boldo murmured it had been quite a day. He softly admitted to himself that something important had just surfaced. Young Boldo walked a tree-lined path, jacket over his shoulder, blending into the passing crowd. A crane loomed over the unfinished building, long shadows draped across the restless sight. A muscular worker in a yellow helmet hauled heavy steel rods over his shoulder as the sight buzzed with purpose. Muscular and battle-weary, young Boldo sighed in relief, saying the hot bath felt amazing after the fight. A muscular man with a furrowed brow lingered outside a glowing shop, quietly watching a video about the surge in unsold apartments. A dark-haired man examined a tiny object, muttering it was worse than he feared, that the country had no hope. Three young men closed in on the seated figure, tension crackling between them. Young Boldo's intense gaze fixed on three anxious onlookers as they scratched at their heads, confused. Relaxed yet focused, young Boldo slurped noodles and blew a smoke ring, the tension easing out of the room. A towel draped over his head, young Boldo soaked in the hot bath while another figure glanced back from a dim alley. Young Boldo, gentle as a caretaker, offered a treat to the cat which eagerly licked it from his hand. He opened the glass door and caught his reflection staring back from the polished surface. Young Boldo barked at the group not to treat this like a game, and the men recoiled in shock and fear. A close-up caught the gambler's determined eyes as he clutched betting slips, silently putting 30,000 on race 7. A cautious young man with dark hair reached toward a trash bin, hand hovering over discarded papers in the dim light. Weary and shadowed by disappointment, young Boldo told Thunderbird he'd truly believed in him. A blonde young man set a hand on the girl's shoulder and insisted he was telling the truth, drawing a surprised "oh" from someone nearby. Intense eyes met. Young Boldo recognized the girl from the coffee shop and called out, voice sharp with surprise. Confident and commanding, young Boldo told his nervous companion to greet the people inside. The reply came hesitant but agreeable. With a confident grin, the blonde-haired young man said they should all go out for drinks. Someone nearby muttered that the grim guy with the cigarette should mind his own business. A determined young man strode through the alley while a bystander told the others to ignore him and not make a scene. A cautious young man with intense eyes wondered aloud if he should follow the group, uneasy about what might come next. Young Boldo scratched his head, murmuring that maybe he was overthinking it. He walked down the orange-lit alley, admitting his generation had been worse, and decided it was time for the bathhouse. Somber and reserved, young Boldo told the others to enjoy while cheerful workers in orange aprons smiled and laughed around him. A braided girl raised her hand and firmly told the crowd not to cut the line. Observant and thoughtful, young Boldo noticed she was back and quietly said he hadn't seen her in a while. The braided girl stood firm, ordering the crowd not to push from the back. A woman in glasses calmly told the group about 30 people remained, then corrected herself, realizing the one she was searching for wasn't there. A wooden spoon scraped the pot while someone wondered if she might have fallen ill. Cooking rice outdoors, a man quietly convinced himself something unexpected must have delayed her. Determined and introspective, young Boldo wondered if something had changed since he last felt that surge of power. A close-up revealed a girl's wide, shocked eye as young Boldo studied her with concern. A voice suggested she was just enjoying time with friends and losing interest in volunteering, as a hand stirred the pot. Alarm lit his eyes as young Boldo stared at his trembling hand, sweat beading on his brow. His shaking hand hovered over his lap as he wondered aloud why a terrible dread twisted in his gut. His arm trembled as his fist clenched tighter. A hand held out a coupon for the Mandarin Eatery, its promise of food and comfort warm beneath the city's soft glow. A voice cautioned the bandana-wearing young man, telling young Boldo not to get ahead of himself. A somber face lingered in thought, troubled by the idea that his old life might never really let him go. A determined visitor with squared shoulders paused outside the Mandarin eatery, focus sharpening as he readied to step in. A cautious man peered through the curtain, muttering they should avoid getting tangled in other people's business. An attentive man turned and greeted the person behind, asking how many were in their party. A frustrated man stomped, shattering a bowl of soup and scattering chopsticks across the floor. Jaw tight, a reflective man quietly wondered if this would end in failure. Determined, young Baldo stared straight ahead as vivid shadows cut across his face. Liquid poured from a green bottle into a glass while someone nearby asked how things had been going, calling out to their boss. Defeated and distressed, young Baldo slumped at the table while the other man faced him with a glass in hand. He swirled the glass and quietly told the man not to worry, it's been a long time already. The other man admitted he hadn't known the girl was related to young Baldo. A phone screen lit up with a playful photo, man and girl flashing matching peace signs. Calm and straightforward, young Baldo drank from a large bowl and said the girl talked him into coming here. With a confident smile, young Baldo spoke up, Jay Jampong. A bearded man with watchful eyes asked if young Baldo knew why a woman hadn't shown up at the soup kitchen lately. In the dark, young Baldo's eyes narrowed as he hesitated, struggling to explain himself to his boss. Water dripped onto a smartphone screen showing a photo of two people, one cheerful, flashing a peace sign. A fearful, trembling subordinate apologized softly to young Baldo. Nervous, young Baldo gripped the phone as the restaurant staff answered, welcoming him to Mandarin Eatery. From behind, a skilled, determined cook chopped fast, insisting he came here to prove his knife work ranks in the top 1%. A sharp knife sliced clean through a green onion as a caller asked if this was Sia Park's father, and got a hesitant yes. The anxious father listened as the caller explained his daughter was in protective custody and asked him to come to the station for more details. A motorcycle wheel skidded hard across asphalt, dust kicking up as someone shouted for CA. Nervous and hesitant, young Baldo swung the exit door open while a braided figure and a shadowed man in red watched in silence. Rain streaked down as an injured, determined man clenched a bloody fist beneath a flickering sign reading, Sia Park. Devastated and trembling, young Baldo quietly called out for his father. His eye widened with distress as he tried to process what he'd just been told about his girl. Tears streaked down young Baldo's face as he clenched his fist, the desperate ache breaking loose inside him. He glared ahead, eyes blazing with furious resolve. In a dim room, the thoughtful man lifted a hand to his face, lost in silent contemplation. From the shadows, an intimidator warned that any attempt to snitch would wipe out their entire family. Young Baldo clenched his teeth in frustration while a menacing figure laughed behind him. A smug blonde leaned in, wondering aloud where the girl's father had vanished, hinting he disappeared when her life fell apart. Injured but determined, young Baldo lowered his gaze in silence as an angry man glared beside him. A tattooed neck young man gripped young Baldo, who told him confidently to wait and let him handle it. A voice urgently called to a man with a gold chain, demanding Mr. Park's attention. Intimidating and confident, young Baldo let his presence fill the room, gold chain glowing against the ink on his neck. Determined and raw, young Baldo ordered someone to stay put and protect CA. A loyal subordinate thrust a hand forward, insisting they'd handle the enemies themselves. Firm and commanding, young Baldo told the others to leave and look after the daughter. Young Baldo rose to face the group and ordered them to leave the others alone. Determined and intense, young Baldo fixed his gaze forward, unblinking. A friendly man in black opened the glass door, inviting young Baldo inside and telling them to follow. From behind the door, someone politely asked them to wait inside while hands held up a poster for the DN Company investment briefing. At the table, someone suggested introductions and another agreed. Nice to finally meet outside the group chat. A young man in a blue LA cap sat quietly, admitting the offer felt almost too generous to be real. A contemplative young man stepped forward, wondering if this moment was truly happening. Four men sat tense and silent at the conference table, all eyes fixed on someone unseen across the room. A man in a suit bowed deeply with a tablet in hand while young Baldo watched in silence. A suited man smiled confidently and said he'd introduce himself. He threw his head back and declared his company was Korea's leading franchise consulting firm. A subdued, dark-haired young man stood motionless while a smug stranger clapped at him, tension thick between them. Smirking, the confident man announced everything was about to begin. A hand clicked the remote, and an angry man jabbed a finger forward in a burst of fury. Frustrated in his blue suit, Yung Boldo raised his hands and argued with two young men, one concerned, the other quietly checking his phone. Overwhelmed, the man wiped his eyes and said he still couldn't believe this was happening. Shoulders tense, a determined man leaned over the podium, his silhouette cut sharp against the light. Sweat trickled down his face as he clapped his hands, forcing himself through the tension. A nervous man scratched the back of his head and asked if anyone had questions about the day's briefing. A tense group, Yung Boldo among them with a contemplative look, sat in silence around the wide table, waiting for someone to speak. An urgent man in a pink shirt told the worried investor, Seung-hun, to sell everything now for a shot at a massive profit. Fighting back tears, Yung Boldo told everyone they could recover and urged them to move forward together. A composed man in a suit instructed the group to raise their hands. Empathetic and supportive, Yung Boldo clasped the other's hand and assured them he truly understood. A calm, long-haired young man smiled gently and said he knew this choice was hard after all they'd been through. Seung-hun, confident, raised his hand as someone told him the money was precious and they were trusting him with it. Another young man blurted that he wanted in too. A businessman in a crisp suit asked the founder about priority investor slots and said his company planned a large investment. Fingers snapped and an unseen speaker told everyone to proceed in order, thanking them for their enthusiasm and hinting more was coming. A woman in a black dress offered a plate of food to a man, thanking him for coming today. Friends and acquaintances gathered around a long table, sharing food and quiet talk as Yung Boldo, casual and observant, sat among them. A formal figure told the nervous pair to catch up and call when ready, while the woman quietly urged Yung Boldo to relax. Calm and confident, Yung Boldo checked his phone while someone nearby promised to walk everyone through next steps and offered thanks. Friendly as ever, Yung Boldo stood beside a joyful blonde woman, both smiling for the phone camera. A man in a blue suit said Yung Boldo's pitch made him want to invest, ruffling the muscular man's hair with a grin. Yung Boldo patted the stack of money and told everyone to keep the momentum going. In his blue suit, Yung Boldo patted the muscular man's back and told him to speak up, keep the energy going. A man in a pink shirt stepped out the door while Yung Boldo and another encouraged him to do his best. A nervous young man hesitantly asked Yung Boldo about something he'd mentioned during the earlier briefing. Serious and intense, Yung Boldo warned that there could be trouble if things went wrong later. Suddenly, an aggressive man yanked the frightened Yung Boldo by the collar as he stammered a panicked refusal. A gloved fist slammed into Yung Boldo's face again and again, each blow heavier than the last. In his blue suit, Yung Boldo waved off the topic and asked the coughing man what happened to the schoolgirl who'd run off. Alert and cautious, Yung Boldo peered through a narrow gap, one intense eye fixed on whatever waited beyond. Cautious and observant, Yung Boldo watched from above as the talk turned to locking the woman's daughter in a room. He clenched his fist tight, ready for whatever came next. A fiery force crashed onto Yung Boldo's head, a shockwave ripping the air. He smashed headfirst onto the hard floor as his attacker drove him down with brutal force. Confident and commanding, Yung Boldo called for the next loser to step up and face him. Strong and sure, Yung Boldo gripped his wrist and yanked hard. A cocky blonde stood front and center, flanked by two silent, shadowed figures. A resolute young man's lip curled as he asked if he was allowed to kill the other guy. A menacing young man in a backward cap cocked his fist, wild eyes promising violence. Yung Boldo swung his weapon at the group while the blonde thug mocked him, saying they might as well start dancing for a TikTok video. A sharp object whipped past Yung Boldo's face as he jerked back just in time. Focused and aggressive, Yung Boldo slammed his fist into the man with sunglasses, the impact heavy and brutal. Caught off guard, Yung Boldo cried out as an unseen attacker struck him hard. He unleashed a fierce vertical strike, his movements exploding with speed and overwhelming force. His sword crashed down with immense force, the ground erupting in shattered stone and dust. Yung Boldo stood with his head bowed, warm light casting a quiet, reflective mood over his solitary figure. A steely gaze flashed from a calculating man as he named 30 million won as the price for the damages. Yung Boldo stared at his trembling hand, red beads catching the light as he calculated aloud, about $22,000. The confident man with a smirk raised a rolled-up scroll and pointed it forward. With authority, an unseen speaker made it clear only one person needed to stand and bring him the cash. Determined and intense, young Baldo warned the shop would close soon if someone didn't hurry. A man with prayer beads dug his fingers into young Baldo's shoulder and said it was time to go through with this. A cocky, bleached-haired young man threatened the older man, warning he'd regret this for the rest of his life. Young Baldo's menacing grin widened, wild eyes gleaming in the shadows. He blocked both attackers' furious swings while one of them shouted for everyone to shut up. Young Baldo lunged at the dark-haired figure, weapon raised, fury driving him forward. A strong hand with a red bead bracelet shot up, and young Baldo blocked a flurry of sharp wooden stakes midair. Determined and strong-willed, young Baldo gripped the sword hilt tight as an unseen opponent fought for control. Determined and aggressive, young Baldo slammed his weapon into the opponent's face as a stunned shout tore free. Fierce and relentless, young Baldo drove his fist straight into his opponent. Suddenly, a man jolted in pain, grimacing as something yanked hard at his hair. The fighter's punch landed with explosive power, a shockwave ripping the air. Young Baldo's eyes burned with determination, gaze razor-sharp as he stared ahead. An injured man with bloodied hands fought desperately as a beaded necklace tightened around his throat, choking off his breath. An unseen assailant smashed young Baldo across the face, leaving him stunned. A harsh slap echoed as young Baldo, raw and vulnerable, heard someone tell him to try again, politely this time. Physically dominant and aggressive, young Baldo shoved his bloodied hand over the injured person's mouth while the victim begged for mercy. A bearded man confronted the startled figure, demanding why he had underwear on his head, and young Baldo blurted a startled reply. A phone rang, drawing the attention of a man in a purple beanie as two silent figures watched. Anxious and sweating, young Baldo demanded over the phone to know what everyone was doing and where they were. Worried and tense, young Baldo stammered that they were at the Chinese restaurant in Silim. A demanding voice insisted on taking the phone and asked who was in charge, while the confused recipient questioned the caller's identity. Serious and still, young Baldo stood with his back turned, phone to his ear in tense silence. Determined and commanding, the gang leader stood at the front with 4 stern allies looming behind him. Confident and sociable, young Baldo lifted his glass in a silent toast as his allies offered smiles and quiet laughter around the table. He asked if the call had dropped, voice tight with confusion as he pressed the phone to his ear. Shattered furniture and spilled food littered the room as a wounded man whispered hesitantly, while young Baldo lay unconscious on the floor. Calm and dominant, young Baldo stood over his twitching opponent and confirmed with a quiet word that he'd won. On the counter, kitchen utensils rested in quiet order, untouched after the chaos nearby. Young Baldo held the phone to his ear and said firmly into the line, "Soup kitchen." A determined young man clenched his fist as an aggressive stranger raised a knife, 2 others watching with tense, mocking looks. Determined and focused, young Baldo clasped his red prayer beads tight and stared ahead with unwavering intensity. Tense and focused, young Baldo studied his phone as 4 serious figures surrounded him in silent tension. Young Baldo flashed a sinister grin as 2 armed henchmen loomed behind him in the shadows. A grim, physically focused strongman man holds a phone to his ear. His mechanical voice buzz fills the steady as he quiet room utters the name, young Baldo. A sleek black and gold car tore through the night, and the driver shouted in disbelief at what just happened. Still, young Baldo twisted sharply, bracing himself as a new threat closed in. A man with a top knot ordered his group to bring Yanbin Li. Young Baldo swung his arm forward in fury, demanding to know what the other man was saying. A confident rival with sharp eyes grinned and said this finally felt right. Young Baldo hurled a fierce open-handed strike at T. Yunseok, who only smirked as he launched himself upward. Young Baldo, furious and aggressive, drove his fist straight into T. Yunseok's face. 10 minutes later, young Baldo stared forward, sweat beading on his face as tension clung to the air. Young Baldo, an annoyed man with scars on his face, slipped a cigarette into his mouth and muttered that they could have just said he wasn't there. Young Baldo, dominant and victorious, stood over his defeated opponents and told the others it was time to move. A tense and anxious man gestured through the dusk-lit street, telling young Baldo to follow him quickly. An unseen voice snapped at others for failing to handle a high school girl, blaming them for the chaos as 2 cars raced side by side. Streetlights cast gentle pools of yellow across the quiet city as evening deepens, shadows stretching along empty sidewalks. Young Baldo looked up resolutely, telling himself he still owed her for the coffee and needed to keep that promise. Young Baldo, a tough, determined man, responded calmly and told the off-panel speaker to go ahead and say say what needed to be said. Sweat rolled down Young Buldo's chin as tension tightened his jaw. A physically weak and unstable figure wobbled on trembling legs, quietly wondering if all their pain had truly been necessary. Yoon-seok, a bearded man, cursed his enemies and then apologized to Young Buldo for what had happened. Young Buldo, heartbroken and vengeful, admitted he had even wished for ghosts to torment those who had wronged him. Young Buldo stared forward with fierce determination, sternly instructing someone to make sure everything was handled exactly as he demanded. A close-up captured Young Buldo's tear-streaked, determined face as he declared he wanted every single one of them. Young Buldo supported an injured Yoon-seok and insisted they leave together. Young Buldo, tense and sweating, yanked his seatbelt tight and told someone on the phone that they had made a serious mistake. A mysterious speaker insisted that Young Buldo deserved to suffer far more than they ever had, abruptly pausing mid-sentence. Young Buldo stared at the razor resting on the sink, his reflection flickering in the chrome. Young Buldo splashed water on his face, begging desperately for something to change. He stared at his own drenched reflection, tension heavy as the silence lingered in the bathroom air. Young Buldo's eyes blazed with confidence as he declared that proving his strength was exactly what he did best. A sinister and confident figure smirked, blood trailing from their lip in the shadows. A passenger with a furious glare yelled for the frustrated driver to turn right, his foot slamming against the dashboard as tensions spiked inside the speeding car. Young Buldo kicked Yoon-seok hard and shouted that he was angry because of him. A car swerved sharply past the sidewalk and someone inside dismissed the drama-chasing neo-tubers, insisting they had already been dealt with. A man in a rush ended his call, insisting his helper get to her before anything leaked. A desperate man clung to the arm of Young Buldo, pleading for mercy as the confident man strode forward through a line of bowing attendants. An irritated, confrontational man shouted at the others, demanding they move and questioning why anyone cared so much about his clothes. A group lounged around a table as a young man in a white shirt waved, calling out a cheerful greeting to Yongbin. Focused man holds a phone to his ear, means to be his voice called a food steady as he server. A composed woman in a black dress reassured the uneasy man beside her that the person he was waiting for was just around the corner. Young Buldo patted his cigar on the table and quietly admitted he'd narrowly avoided serious trouble. A confident leader in a white shirt leaned forward, telling Yongbin that they needed him to take care of something. A determined woman with short black hair tapped her cigarette and told Jin Myung they all had to cooperate if the operation was going to last. A woman with an alluring presence crossed her legs and announced her role with MZ Gang Friends Entertainment and modeling agency management. Young Buldo sat back in his chair, telling someone on the phone that a big spending customer now took priority over everything else. A man with long dark hair greeted everyone at the table, sounding cheerful as the group gathered beneath the chandelier. A pink-haired character waved and called out to Hwaisu, while Young Buldo, a tough, determined man, greeted her with a nod. A sociable woman lifted her glass and told Hwaisu he was looking good today. A small dog nibbled at its owner's shoe as the person encouraged it to be good and promised a lively day together. A calm, physically strong man reclines shirtless in a high-tech chair as its mechanical buzz fills the quiet room. Young Buldo, determined and resolute, told Yoon-seok there would be no holding back until they collapsed. Young Buldo glanced sideways, uneasy as he muttered to himself about Yoon-seok watching him. A man with slick-back hair grinned and told Yongbin he'd heard things hadn't been easy for him lately. Yoon-seok, an assertive and imposing man, slumped beside Young Buldo and demanded to know if he had anything to say. Young Buldo, worried and tense, explained that they cycle the kids through the operation and insisted it was just a bit of trouble. Young Buldo glared fiercely at Yoon-seok, his stare hard and unyielding in the charged silence between them. A fearful and submissive figure stammered out an apology, shrinking back as the looming presence threatened to beat the truth out of them. A confident and assertive young man raised his hand, insisting he'd already taken care of the neo-tubers. Young Buldo, intense and confrontational, demanded Director Dongshin's opinion as Yoon-seok watched from behind with a solemn gaze. A serious man with sharp features raised 3 fingers to his chest, introducing himself to the group as Dongshin CO, Hwaisu Yong's fixer. Quiet room. A woman in a black suit presses a button on her device while Young Boldo, nervous and sweating, calls out to the silent connection. Young Boldo leaned in, urging Yongbin to answer him and calling out for a response with determined urgency. A nervous man with dark hair flinched as someone patted his head, softly admitting to Huesu that 3 days would be enough. Yoon-seok awkwardly slid his arm around Young Boldo, telling everyone they should relax because they were all friends. Young Boldo pressed the remote control and announced that it was time to begin the main event. Yoon-seok, a confident man loosening his shirt, asked Jennifer who she had chosen for tonight. A confident young woman in a visor announced that some of the trainees had come from Citri Entertainment. A confident woman with a playful smile winked, her expression turning the mood light and mischievous. Young Boldo, a confident and muscular man, strode into the bright room and unzipped his jacket with a grin, saying it had been a while since they'd seen a full house. A smug and provocative antagonist leaned under neon lights, calling Young Boldo handsome. Young Boldo, confident and surrounded by 2 women, lifted his shirt as he told himself he had things under control for now. Young Boldo, determined and defiant, shouted that this was the only way no matter what anyone said. Young Boldo pumped his fist under the spinning lights and shouted that it was time to celebrate. A pair of strong, determined hands snapped a wallet in half, the sharp sound breaking through the tension. A nervous and fearful subordinate, head bowed, pleaded that they only followed orders over the phone and insisted they knew nothing else. A phone shattered in midair as someone growled that they had no patience for evasive answers. Then a hand slid a cigarette from its pack, and someone insisted they get straight to the point. Yoon-seok, a confident and aggressive man, leaned in with a glare and demanded to know where the boss was. A trembling hand gripped a cigarette, and the nervous man insisted they had never met him before. Only a member would recognize him. Yoon-seok, shocked and alarmed, stared forward as Young Boldo's arm twitched tensely behind him. 2 figures stepped into the dim room, and the young woman called Sia was told by Young Boldo to stay put while the adults handled things. Young Boldo stared forward with fierce resolve, asking if someone planned to fight because of him. A confused person gripped their phone, staring at the screen as they wondered aloud who had just called them. A secretive and cautious woman peered from behind the doorway, her lips pressed tight as she watched the room in tense silence. Young Boldo dismissed the issue with a confident smirk, saying it really wasn't anything worth worrying about. Tears streamed down Young Boldo's face as he peeked nervously from behind the door, unsure if it was safe to come out. Young Boldo, a tough, determined man, blamed himself quietly, regretting that if he had paid closer attention, everything might have turned out differently. Young Boldo, a tough, determined man, declared that he would take responsibility because he believed it was his fault. A frustrated young person's face filled the panel as they demanded to know what difference chasing after the others would actually make. Furious, Young Boldo's mouth twisted as he yelled, his dark hair whipping wildly around his face. A sweating, anxious man with intense eyes blurted out that the others couldn't be punished because they were minors protected by juvenile law. Young Boldo braced himself to rise as a threatening figure loomed overhead. A calm man with a bun hairstyle faced away in the dim light, telling Flops he believed her daughter had been raised well. Young Boldo stared at his ringing phone, the name Junhui Seong lighting up the screen as tension filled the air. Young Boldo, a tough, determined man, glanced sharply to the side, his focus unbroken by the tension rising around him. He clenched his fist, saying he'd been fighting this fight since childhood. Young Boldo stared intensely, admitting to himself that he had truly changed, though a hint of doubt crept into his thoughts. Young Boldo scratched the back of his head and muttered under his breath in frustration. A dark-haired woman glared down as a commanding voice ordered her to move, insisting they were leaving for the club right now. Young Boldo, hesitant and vulnerable, spoke softly to Yoon-seok and asked if he could help. Young Boldo, a tough man with dark hair, stood outside the club and asked his companions if they were certain this was the right place. Yoon-seok, a commanding protector, told Young Boldo to stay right behind him and not even think about making a run for it. Several men in suits squared off on the brick pavement as a determined elder called for everyone to stop and was told he didn't belong here. Yoon-seok, a stern guard, blocked Young Boldo's path and told him only young people were allowed inside. A shirtless man with a smug grin slipped off his jacket while Young Boldo yelled at Yongbin, saying there was no time for jokes. Yoon-seok placed his hand on Young Boldo's chest and shouted for everyone to wait. A blond man with a sly smile told the tense man he was sure he'd found the right place. Young Baldo, suspicious and confrontational, demanded to know who the stranger was. Young Baldo, a determined man, told them this was the place and ordered everyone to move so he could go meet the person inside. T. Yoon-seok, aggressive and confrontational, grabbed Young Baldo's shoulder and warned him not to move if he didn't want trouble. Young Baldo twisted T. Yoon-seok's arm and threatened to break his hand. Furious, Young Baldo swung a heavy punch and shouted that he couldn't believe what was happening. T. Yoon-seok, an aggressive attacker, drove a punch straight at Young Baldo, who quickly ducked his head to evade the blow. Young Baldo smashed his fist into T. Yoon-seok's face with a thunderous blow. Young Baldo, a tough, determined man, hurled T. Yoon-seok across the room, sending him crashing violently into the wall. Young Baldo pressed his hand and face against the glass, reacting with alarm as he muttered that something had gone terribly wrong. Then Young Baldo grabbed T. Yoon-seok's hand, and T. Yoon-seok screamed that his hand was in agony. Young Baldo gripped his injured hand, crying out desperately that something was wrong. A fist crashed into Young Baldo's hand, and he let out a guttural cry from the sudden pain. A projectile shot past Young Baldo's intense gaze, his focus tightening as the threat raced by in a blur. A nervous young man raises his hands and pleads that he's just the valet and wants nothing to do with the trouble outside. A nervous man with a headband rushed up the stairs and reported that an old man was storming into the club. Young Baldo, a determined man, drove his foot hard into T. Yoon-seok's side as the fight exploded into motion. Young Baldo, a tough, determined man, demanded to know who the approaching figure was as he pointed a finger in challenge. Suddenly, a fast punch smashed into Young Baldo's face, leaving him reeling from the force of the attack. Multiple men in suits slammed Young Baldo onto the ground, the impact echoing through the room as he struggled to catch his breath. Neon lights glimmered over Club Wyvern as the city pulsed with energy, promising chaos behind its doors. Baldo hurled his fist at a long-haired man, neon lights flickering across their faces as the blow connected. A furious man slams his fist into the face of a shocked man with braided hair, who blurts out in surprise. A nervous young man holds up a bead bracelet, insisting he already knew the other was coming and admitting the scare shook him. Suddenly, an unknown character in distress spews a torrent of dark liquid from their mouth with a violent, agonized gasp. A red-shirted man strains beneath a massive weight, muttering that he can't believe how heavy this thing actually is. A concerned voice called out, warning the older man with beads that carrying something so heavy could wreck his elbow at his age. Then a black shoe slammed to the ground with a forceful stomp. The dark-haired figure lunged forward, striking hard, as the man in red gasped in shock. A close-up captured Snake Eye's tense face, sweat gathering as an unseen authority ordered him to stay focused and reminded him his audition wasn't finished. A muscular man with green hair drove his fist into the black-haired swordsman, landing a brutal blow that sent the katana wielder reeling. A determined, injured young man surged forward, jaw clenched, as he began to say there was something else. A dark-clothed figure struck a pale-faced man with a sudden finger jab, sending shockwaves through the swirling burst of color and motion. A muscular man in a red shirt crashed to the ground with force as three stunned men behind him yelled in shock. Then a quick, agile boy with green hair and a focused, black-haired boy both swung themselves forward with fierce determination. Blood streamed down the neck of an injured, intense man with a top knot as he struggled to hold himself upright. A determined, authoritative leader shouted at the three bruised men on the ground, demanding that they get up. Still, a bruised and bloodied man glared back, challenging whoever had just called him tired. A young man with a scar and several piercings gave a smug, confident smile as the soft light caught his face. Then a tense hand gripped the stained wooden mallet, ready for the next move. A serious and wounded man rattled red prayer beads, telling someone this wasn't a game for amateurs. A dominant figure stood tall among the wounded, while a man in red smirked and held his head, unmoved by the chaos. A dominant figure with a hammer confronted three subdued men on the ground, taunting them and demanding their agreement as the tension spiked. Main character with an intense glare is struck through the forehead by several sharp objects, refusing to collapse. Calm and deliberate, an unnamed person fastened a luxurious watch around their wrist, the sharp click echoing softly through the heavy silence. A dark-haired man lights a cigarette as a skeptical, partially visible figure examines an object and wonders aloud if it might be a replica. A young man with glittering jewelry pinned down an older man's leg bag and smugly asked if the old man cared about watches. A confident, confrontational man gripped his weapon, scoffing that hired muscle shouldn't have empty pockets. Someone cheered for winning 50,000 won, as a hand quickly slipped the cash into a waiting wallet. Then, a young man crouched near a fallen knife and ordered everyone to quit worrying and start grabbing whatever they could. A scarred man with an intense stare jerked back, demanding to know what the unseen speaker thought he knew. The serious man explained that these people had politicians on call and claimed Yongbin could bribe a precinct without effort. A tense man with a topknot demanded to know why the smirking man kept mentioning Yongbin and pressed him about their connection. A young man with dark hair closed his eyes and smiled, a quiet sense of peace settling over his features. A confident man with a topknot surveyed the battered room and reported that he had dealt with the rest, assuring everyone the enemies were down. The dark-haired tense man clenched his fist and warned the unseen person that things could get much uglier if pushed. An intense, impatient man leaned forward and told the kid he didn't have much patience left. The assertive, commanding man fixed his gaze and told the unseen listener this was their last chance to speak. A confident young man with dark hair and earrings smirked, challenging his unseen opponent and saying he liked his chances in a fight. The furious, confrontational man glared and muttered that he couldn't stand being disrespected. In the harsh light, a furious man drove his fist into his bloodied opponent's face, then barked for the next challenger. A surprised man named Goose demanded to know why he was there, while the defiant man with a topknot calmly announced he was quitting. A young man with dark hair pressed his hands to his face and quietly apologized for what had just happened. Jung ordered the next challenger to step forward as the tense crowd watched in silence. A furious man in a suit grabbed someone's shoulder and shouted at the bouncers to start doing their jobs. Suddenly, a masked figure lunged forward and struck a man, who let out a cry of pain as he rolled backward while a shocked girl watched. Then, a yellow car surged past a white car, both racing down the glowing city street beneath the looming skyscrapers. A dark-haired man lies unconscious on the floor as a curious woman with a glowing phone murmurs in surprise. A concerned man in a suit rushed over and urgently asked the hunched, injured man if he was all right. A man with anxious eyes clutched his head while two others watched a shadowy figure descend the red-lit stairs toward them. A shocked young woman holds up her smartphone and demands to know why no one is moving. Young Baldo swipes across his smartphone screen as a recording timer blinks in the corner. He jabbed a finger at a stoic, top-knot-wearing man and accused him of stirring up trouble at their clubs. Four aggressive pursuers in dark suits shouted for someone to attack the kneeling, vulnerable man below them. A confident man holding a drink told the crowd to turn off their cameras. Young Baldo spoke quietly, saying they should wait to see what unfolds, while a sly, secretive figure crept behind him in the shadows. A determined and aggressive man gripped his weapon, declaring he'd rather destroy everyone or force the boss to finally appear. A distressed woman sat on the floor as an assertive man snapped her photo, while a mocking man watched with a smug grin. A furious man with wild eyes shouted at someone off-panel, demanding to know if they thought their head was made of steel. Suddenly, an aggressive attacker drove a spiked bat into the back of a wounded man, who staggered forward with a gasp of pain. A dark-haired figure seized a man's face, and the man shouted that they'd chosen the wrong opponents. A sinister man with a threatening grin gripped a glowing object tightly, his hand squeezing it until the light seemed to pulse beneath his fingers. A dark-haired man grabbed a blurred figure and slammed them into the ground as the victim let out a muffled cry. An unseen force crashed into the ground, triggering a massive explosion and sending debris flying as someone screamed in pain. A furious and determined fighter with blood on his face locked eyes with his opponent and challenged him to come forward. Without hesitation, Jung lunged forward, fist clenched and eyes blazing with resolve. Then, a young man with dark hair jerked his head back in shock, speed lines slicing through a blood-red backdrop. A dark-haired man unleashed a brutal punch, striking the masked opponent's face with such force that a shockwave rippled through the air. Music thumped through the nightclub as a young man with dark hair danced with the crowd, surrounded by swirling lights and pulsing energy. A confident man with a sly smile held up his ringing smartphone, quietly remarking that someone was proving to be more skilled than expected. The confident man with slicked back hair stayed composed while an angry man pointed at him from behind, tension thickening the air. A young man with dark hair stared at his smartphone, quietly saying he couldn't believe what he was seeing. A young man with dark hair grimaced as a blurred attacker's fist slammed into his face. A fierce man with a top knot moved with such intensity that someone watching remarked it looked almost like he was dancing. A dark-haired man blocked a furious knife strike with his staff as another attacker raised his fist, ready to join the fray. Blood streamed down the injured man's face as he glared fiercely, while an imposing figure stood silently behind him holding a sword. A dark-haired figure smashed his fist down with explosive force, landing a furious blow on whoever was beneath him. A confident young man smiled and told someone off-screen that he was completely taken with them. Red and blue lights shimmered across the floor as a presence in formal black shoes paused near a sharp knife. A short-haired woman, playful and confident, pressed close as she touched the young man with dark hair on the crowded dance floor. Then, a dark-haired character collapsed face first onto the blood-red carpet with a heavy thud. A mysterious presence in black shoes stepped close to a wooden stick dripping with dark liquid. A weary man in a black suit retreated upstairs, muttering that he could feel his age catching up with him. A man with a purple cap raised his hands as a shadowed figure called out and taunted him. A serious man with dark hair lit his cigarette as someone nervously suggested he should give up searching if the person wasn't found. A man with his hair tied up stopped beside two shadowed figures and asked if they were looking for Yongbin or their mother. A confident and condescending man smirked and warned that their current approach would never lead them to the person they were searching for. A dark-haired man with intense eyes demanded to know who the other person was, and the unseen figure echoed the question back at him. A young man with short dark hair and earrings smiled warmly, introducing himself as Yoonseok T. A fighter with short dark hair pointed to the name Kenji on his shirt as someone nearby remarked that his skills stood out in the fight. Suddenly, a man with a top knot drove his foot hard into another man's chest, sending chaos rippling through the hallway as bystanders stared in shock. A hand in a red sleeve reached forward, and the disdainful figure muttered that he kept encountering lowlifes today. The confident young man in a red shirt reached forward, warning his unseen opponent that he was ready to fight too. A black van screeched to a halt in the street, drawing the attention of a dark-haired person and someone in a purple beanie nearby. A determined pursuer slid open the van door, shouting urgently to his crew that he had spotted their target and it was time to move. A snarling man gripped a large knife, warning his opponents that they were in way over their heads. A man with thick eyebrows demanded to know how many there were, while another young man with dark hair stared in anxious disbelief. A man with a bun, alert and serious, dashed forward as his surprised companion watched him react to the overwhelming crowd. A desperate man with a purple head covering pointed and commanded the others to remove someone immediately. A smirking man with several followers mocked his unseen opponents, sneering that they were just an old man and a street punk. Then, a confident group of men closed in as their leader threatened the unseen opponent, boasting that someone would need to feed their victim through a straw. A calm, purposeful figure tightened their grip on a dark cloth bag, the vibrant pink-purple glow casting sharp shadows across their hand. One person in the crowd jeered, loudly questioning if the target was nothing more than a street punk. A reserved young man with dark hair rattled a bead necklace against his chest, calmly remarking that he hadn't expected such opportunism but would go along with it. A serious and concerned man twisted a mechanical wooden box, demanding to know what was meant by the word temporary. A grim and resolute leader with a top knot addressed the group, telling them to treat this moment like an audition. A nervous man in a tiger jacket warned his companion as the crowd behind them shouted for both men to be killed. A fierce young man with dark hair bared his teeth in a menacing grin, gripping a massive hammer tightly in his hands. A hand spun a keychain around a metal cylinder labeled Mjolnir, the air filled with the sharp sound of swishing. The dark-haired boy surged forward and punched the man with a scarred face as his opponent shouted about blood. A focused man glared at the sharp blade near his face and asked if his opponent truly believed they could cut him. The angry, dark-haired man exploded with fury, hurling a punch that sent the man in the red shirt flying backward through the alley. Young Baldo spoke quietly while behind him, a nervous soldier watched with sweat running down his face. A shocked and anxious man stared upward, barely able to utter a quiet sound as he tried to process what he was seeing. A red-jacketed man delivered a brutal strike to his opponent and declared in a cold voice that it was a double kill. A fierce man with a large sword lunged forward, slashing through his foes and announcing with satisfaction that he had just just scored a triple kill. The red-suited fighter surged forward, landing a devastating punch to the young man with dark hair as he shouted that it was a quadra kill. A muscular fist adorned with a bead bracelet swung forward, the force behind it aimed squarely at an unseen target. A masked orange-haired fighter drove his fist into the bald man's face with brutal force. Then, a masked orange-haired fighter grimaced as he blocked a powerful strike from his dark-haired opponent. A tense, dark-haired man gripped a metal pipe, recognizing it and muttering with disbelief that he now held a weapon. A determined and aggressive fighter's eyes narrowed with fury as he barked an order to split open his opponent's head. A shocked man with intense eyes reacted, taunting that no one had expected what just happened. Three intense men in suits closed in on a person with a bun, the middle one jabbing a finger aggressively as the crowd watched. A man with spiky hair staggered back as an unseen assailant struck him hard in the face, crying out in pain. A bruised man with black hair lifted his arm, showing black bead bracelets wound tightly around his wrist. A massive, ominous hand adorned with dark prayer beads loomed forward. The demon had arrived. The demon, a long-haired, bearded man with a glowing red eye, glared upward, his presence radiating menace through the fiery red haze. A wounded but fiercely determined man glared with blazing eyes, blood streaming down his face as his fury intensified. A bald man swung a wooden weapon with brutal force, striking a dark-haired person and sending blood spraying across the scene. A man with a top-knot face bloodied from the blow looked up and insisted there should be no more hitting. A man with prayer beads clutched his arm as a heavy object crashed beside him, cursing in frustration at the near miss. A stern man with an intimidating presence stands before the city lights, while frightened men shuffle nervously behind him under the tense night sky. A young man with dark hair ruffles his hair and grins, ignoring the angry figure shouting behind him. The city glitters below, the Royal Bridge skyscraper knifing into the night. A hand thrusts a phone into view, a fierce man with a top knot filling the screen as someone off to the side says this is a different problem, just watch. Focused hands load a handgun. He mutters he needs to stay sharp, the others still have no idea. Worried but resolved, Jung decides to handle this new threat before it explodes. Bloodied and set, he clenches his fist as a phone rings. Someone already knows exactly who to send after those thugs. A hooded figure looms over a wounded man, warning him not to cross the wrong people again as blood spreads cold on tile. The hooded man makes a call. He's got a job for someone. Two pairs of shoes approach ahead on the cold floor, cigarette butts and a card scattered nearby. Three men stand outside a storefront. Their cautious lead warns how far Yongbin's business really reaches. He explains he never runs daily operations himself. He uses middlemen and checks in by phone. Leaning on a yellow sports car, a woman in black tells the man beside her his worst fear is losing celebrity clients. A red-jacketed man smirks, shouting is outdated and useless next to the massive profits their rivals rake in. Young Buldo appears battered and unbowed, grimacing hard as his bruised face fills the frame. Young presses Yoon-seok, why didn't you step in sooner? T says he couldn't do it alone and the next target isn't the same. Serious and watchful, Jung stands beside a friendly young man as Yoon-seok says they've arrived. Jung studies the rundown spot. This is it, Yoon-seok confirms without a blink. Warm light spills as a woman in a vibrant kimono offers a plate, another cheerful woman smiling just behind. Two solemn men in dark suits guard the Sakura entrance as one phrase repeats in someone's mind, the Anicap bar. He glares with razor focus, sweat sliding down his temple. The shirtless man smirks at his phone and orders someone to find out which families the new guys belong to. In a dim glow, a hooded figure types fast, insisting they need to keep Yongbin's business under watch and protect their operations. The hooded figure, David, warns them not to get tangled up in this mess. A dominant fighter yanks a tense young man by the hair and dares him. Does he really feel lucky about his chances? A low, angry voice calls the kid a disrespectful punk as a hand tightens around a hammer, ready to swing. Alarmed and resolute, Young Buldo charges the imposing boss, shouting that he'll teach him a lesson. He checks the room, urgent and protective. Everyone okay? Where's CA? Under the sheets, two bodies lie close, legs intertwined in quiet intimacy. Focused on his daughter, Jung tells the boss he has every reason to be here. Yoon-seok calls him stubborn. Young Buldo looms over a breathless kid with wide eyes, demanding to know who he is. A probing man turns to a nervous Yoon-seok. Was he the one from the station? What happened with his daughter? Two men stride to the guy in the tiger jacket. One says they need to talk. He tells them to give him a moment. With a steady hand, Yoon-seok lights Jung's cigarette, Jung quietly wonders who helped Si at the station. Jung and Tae Yoon-seok lift their hands, wary. Jung says he doesn't trust this new face, not after what happened with Si and with Tae Yoon-seok. A ring-laden smile waves them off. Someone mutters that if he tries anything, they'll snap his neck without blinking. Jung tells Tae Yoon-seok to squeeze someone for information. Tae Yoon-seok nods, he'll handle it. Jung stands over him and tells him to get up, he'll grant his wish. Also, what were they whispering about? Tae Yoon-seok invites him for a drink, leading the group toward the building as the third man quietly trails behind. A moment later, the teal-haired one lets out a soft snore while the young woman beside them stays still. Jung says there's a cool spot nearby. Tae Yoon-seok grumbles he can't handle whatever kids are into. With a smirk, Jung assures him this place is worth it. The door creaks and a determined visitor bursts in, calling out for his aunt. A man sporting a tiger emblem greets them, asks for a table for 3, and welcomes the newcomers. Confident and open, Jung waves everyone inside. Another voice urges them to shut the door and keep the cold out. Outside, a younger guy says this place might work. Jung's surprised kids still know spots like this. Someone calls for the uncles to enjoy their meal, thanks an aunt, and 3 dishes wait on the table. Jung jokes about trendy food. Tae Yoon-seok grimaces at the raw liver. The third man asks what their deal is. Off to the side, someone jokes the pale kid's got guts. He eats raw liver for the vitamins, never mind how it looks. A tense man with long black hair snaps, what does he want? Then he introduces himself, Yoon-seok T. A calm, dark-haired man leans back, swirling his wine as a phone rings sharp against the city view. Calm with a glass in hand, Jung says his real job is tracking Yongbin. Any run-ins with their family were pure coincidence. He leans in, confident and strategic, drop the act and team up. They all want the same thing. He says flatly he needs their muscle, and they, he adds, need his information. An unseen voice agrees, they'll hunt for Yongbin together. Jung's stare drops to the water glass, focus sharpening as the air tightens. He pats Tae Yoon-seok's hand and passes a small glass, ready to start. Clear liquid spills into the glass. An anxious gaze follows it, asking what comes next and insisting they're square. Jung, still suspicious, wants to know why the other is after him if he expects trust. Hands trade the glass. The first man warns him to consider who he's dealing with and why. He holds the glass in one hand, gaze sliding sideways as a thoughtful silence settles. Jung knocks the water back, eyes steady. The other man watches, wordless. A glass hits the table with a sharp clack. A name cuts through, Yongbin Lee. Under a desk, a dark-haired young man taps his feet, hands clasped, waiting with quiet confidence. On the surface, the business looks clean, money parked in restaurants, photo booths, bakeries, the kind of places you pass every day. Half hidden, Jung thinks bitterly, everyone's pretending, everyone's skimming. In a crowded space, a man with glasses scrolls his phone as the narrative lays it out. Scammers seed rumors and fake tips online. At the front, a slick talker explains the hook. A seminar, a little truth, a lot of empty promises. A smug suit laughs as a hand goes up. The pitch targets employees from respectable mid-sized companies. A bespectacled man at the mic scolds those who get reckless once they taste a little success. A business card, Dong Jin Lee, flashes as greedy kids get duped into thinking they're serious investors. The phone buzzes in the quiet room, and the distracted, annoyed young man wonders aloud why David is calling now. Another polished card, flashy titles, guaranteed profits on paper. A broad-shouldered man stares through a quiet cafe, doubting anyone wins by rushing to open a shop. And when it all sours, out come the tech buzzwords and twisted contracts, pulling them into shady crypto schemes. Jung's hands shake over a document while 2 stern suits loom behind him. Suits drag Jung from a car while others force Tae Yoon-seok to the sidewalk. A blow slams Jung's head to the pavement, glasses shattering as someone rages, this world has wrecked hundreds of families. A hand hovers over a cracked phone. Threats whisper, stay quiet or we use the drugs and the videos. A cold voice adds the last threat, if nothing else works we take the organs. He's heard enough. Jung's eyes harden, times aren't what they were, silence. His trembling fist crushes the glass. A subordinate blurts agreement, understood. A finger hovers, then taps the glowing accept button, breaking the hush. Blood threads into the broken shards, a quiet question left behind. How does someone go that far? Still shaking, Jung tells his boss he can't understand why they pushed it this far. A calm young man offers a torn cloth, clean up, and sorry about the glass. Jung wipes the blood and tells Tae Yoon-seok he has his reasons for going after Yongbin Lee. Serious now, glass in hand, He says it started when those men went after his mother. Casual again with a small cup, he asks if they want to hear the family history too. He reaches forward, owning the insult. He can't argue with it, then moves on. A hand reaches as Yoon-seok quietly asks where they're headed next. A confident smile, good, they're ready to begin. Young clasps Yoon-seok's hand, so that makes them friends, right? Yoon-seok shuts it down, don't call it that. Smirking into the screen, he teases David for skipping their usual meetup and asks why he's calling this late. Young tightens his grip. Yoon-seok says it's going to be a long night for now. On the line, someone blows up, end the call, and blames everyone for failing against just two guys. Fierce and incredulous, Young mutters a food server was unbelievable. Who is this old man, really? He stares down at the laptop, unconvinced. Phone down with a thud. Sometimes, he says, the unexpected is what keeps life interesting. He faces the mirror, breath fogging, and lets out a heavy sigh. With a faint grin, Young tells Yoon-seok, yeah, the unexpected is interesting. Back at his desk, fingers fly. Bright-eyed, he declares he just realized he's a genius. The cursor hovers over Go Live, hangs there, then clicks. The stream begins. On the broadcast, Young bows his head. He has unfortunate news tonight. Shirtless and relaxed, he mutters that Yongbin is skimming again, bold enough that he almost respects it. An unseen voice reports a troublemaker picking fights and making scenes at multiple clubs. A weary man bows and wonders why people like him, just trying to get by, always end up targeted when times turn hard. A mouse clicks, someone mentions drug rumors starting to swirl around their club. A tear slips down a desperate man's cheek as he begs to be believed. Someone insists it's all lies from rivals, apologizes, and pleads not to believe any of it. Then a click bans the chatter. Moved by the support, Young wipes fast, insists he's not crying, and thanks the donor. Bolstered now, he says he won't give up, while two suited men behind him murmur about keeping donations flowing until the stream ends. A neon blast Club Dragon, promising wild deals and free entry for a 3-day grand event. A cunning gaze narrows over a phone. People are easy to move with the right little incentive. A confident warning lands, one mistake could be fatal. Hwasoo won't hesitate to kill him. Two figures moved in silence, the air tightening with quiet anticipation as one murmured they'd finally made it. Boldo, tense and set, told his boss these scumbags were about to get what was coming to them, while Yoon-seok's prayer beads clicked in his hand. Boldo answered firm and clear, approved. Sweat slick on his shoulders, Boldo took the order to wipe out everyone at Sakura and said he'd handle it. A fingertip hovered, then pushed the glowing red record button. It was on. Boldo tugged at his collar with a gloved hand, tension carved into his face. A confident man with braids gave the word. Seongti was to round up every boy ready to work now. Resolved, Boldo told Yoon-seok they were heading to Sakura. Yoon-seok agreed. Thick drops of black liquid slapped the wood, each one landing with dread. A blood-slick hand shook around a stained mallet as ragged breaths filled the hush. Boldo shouted for Yongbin, saying he knew he was watching, then told Snake Eyes they'd stayed long enough. It was time to go. Frustrated but steady, he told his boss they'd pick up the search tomorrow and grumbled about a slippery mark. Suspicious and firm, Yoon-seok demanded a badge. Staying alert, Boldo noted the other guy didn't have one. A security camera on the wood-paneled wall blinked and chirped sharply. Boldo glared up, snapping that the camera was tracking, and barking for Yongbin to come out and face him. Shapes surged forward as their lead barked to move in and finish quick. Morning training, he called it. A knife and a stick clattered onto the floor as a voice reminded them they had exactly 10 minutes. Their answer came in one hard shout, a single voice made of many. Battered but unbroken, Boldo scoffed and called it a joke, while Yoon-seok suddenly worried about what might be next. A man with dreadlocks stepped up, stunned, asking if these were the ones who pissed off Yongbin, then spotted Han-seong Kang. Keeping his voice low, Boldo warned his silent partner they might be in trouble. The whole crew ahead were MMA fighters. From the crowd, someone said Han-seong Kang was a UFF middleweight. Boldo stood at the front, solid and commanding, with 4 grim men holding back behind him. Boldo, all muscle and fury, drove his fist into Yoon-seok and dropped him with a sharp cry. He told his partner to make it quick so they could eat, and Yoon-seok agreed. Sauna was on him after. An unseen handler said there weren't many enemies and they could manage. Boldo nodded once, ready. Boldo gave the order to finish it. Yoon-seok snapped a bright yes, sir, and the rest chimed in behind him. A bruised man bared his teeth, spitting that the athletes were rotten sellouts. Baldo's grin turned feral. He said he'd handle it himself and called his opponents worthless. They walked past the men they'd laid out. A bystander muttered the boss wanted speed and that he'd take point. A sultry performer gripped the pole, lifted her skirt, and flashed lace and a smear of red lipstick. A dancer spun upside down on the pole while a couple in front of her melted into a kiss. A woman in a revealing kimono sat with a sushi platter, calm amid a club buzzing with laughter and acrobatic flair. A woman in traditional dress bowed deeply as two men behind a sliding door laughed and wiped the sweat from their brows. Another in formal attire set down a golden sushi platter. One man joked he needed something cold and welcomed a new hire. A confident woman in a red dress asked a jittery man to sit. Baldo stumbled over an apology, caught off guard. Over the air animecaps bar tightening with quiet anticipation as one murmured they'd finally made it. A sultry hostess took a young man by the hand, guiding him into a scene that felt like a dream. With cool authority, a hard-eyed figure told the managers exactly what needed to happen. A worried woman in purple got a pat on the shoulder from a masked man as she whispered she was only supposed to be serving. Leaning in close, a menacing man said the trembling guy owed a fortune and should obey unless he wanted to be dumped somewhere remote. A woman with floral pins shrieked as an unseen hand yanked her kimono down, leaving the room in stunned silence. At the center, a confident figure smirked, and Yoon-seok breathed that the place was absurdly luxurious. Baldo, voice tight, said he might have saved someone's daughter from ending up here. Heavy footsteps pounded down the hall as someone sprinted forward, urgency in every stride. Baldo, all force and intent, burst through the doorway as the crowd erupted in screams. An angry man jabbed a finger at the three intruders, demanding who they were and how they got in. An eager, hesitant man quietly asked his boss if he could use his gear, and Baldo asked if he was really ready. Three stone-faced youths blocked a man in a suit, and Baldo told him this entrance was for those with the right badge only. A hand tightened on a drawn sword as someone addressed the boss, tension thickening the air. A masked fighter steadied his grip and said he was still in the game and ready. Baldo's voice softened with memory. This felt like the old days. They'd do it the way they always had. Teasing, Baldo added it looked like the uncle had been a big deal once too. He lunged, slashing hard at an unseen opponent, every motion sharp with rage. A punch hissed past Baldo's cheek and he snapped, demanding to know who sent these punks. Baldo brawled through several attackers at once, and one of them screamed. Reeling from a heavy shot to the face, he cried out but refused to buckle. He tightened his hold on the wooden weapon, resigned, muttering there was no room left for him here. A hand flipped a hammer through the air, the unseen voice agreeing to move. To wear that golden pin, a person had to spend at least 60 million a month for 6 straight months. Baldo tore down a dark alley, shouting he was coming for Yongbin. He caught a vicious blow on guard, while his attacker roared he wanted him dead. A shaky hand squeezed a string of black beads, a red glint winking in the dark. Baldo drove his fist down and crunched Yoon-seok's arm, drawing a cry of pain. He grabbed Yoon-seok by the collar and yanked him in, the tension almost sparking. An enraged man crashed through a sliding door, splinters flying as diners scrambled, and a woman screamed. Trying to steady the room, Baldo ordered everyone to keep moving. Nothing to see here. His eyes widened, every muscle set, as he locked on what waited ahead. Carefully, he peeked around the door, whispering "peek" in a low, wavering voice. A shirtless man clutching his clothes shouted for the professors to hurry before the cops arrived and bolted down the hall. 3 elegant women bowed to a suited guest while the voiceover explained that these VIPs got service tailored to their every desire. Someone begged the professor for help. Another voice snapped at them to let go and spat an insult. Baldo slid the door open and leaned out, focused and wary. He stared at the sake bottle, quietly wondering if this was really the end. On the floor, a shaken figure begged anyone nearby for help. Gasping, bleeding, Baldo pleaded with the professor to help as he fought for air on the floor. Sweating, a man with glasses wrestled his shirt free and asked staff to get the unconscious woman off him. Baldo's jaw locked. These people always found new ways to sink lower. He ripped an ID badge free and growled that if the man didn't shut up, he'd tear out his tongue. Curious and disgusted, Baldo turned the professor's ID in his hand. marveling that big-name university staff were actually here. A furious face twisted as a man spat a threat about old men chasing girls young enough to be their daughters. An intense, laser-focused man spoke bluntly about the problems with the staff here. Leaning in, the man with glasses insisted he only helped because the girls begged and demanded they leave his daughter out of it. A fist crushed down on a beaded bracelet as the furious stranger swallowed a curse. Baldo drove a punch forward, shouting that nobody could lay a finger on him. He had powerful protection. He roared for silence and smashed a fist across the other guy's face. Baldo hammered his fist down again, demanding to know who they thought was protecting them now. He swung the wooden weapon hard, shouting for someone to stop. A hand clamped over the wooden sword, a commanding voice ordering everything to stop. Breath ragged, bleeding, Baldo struggled to pull air back in after the beating. He kept his grip on the weapon and told them to stop, eyes locked on someone just off-screen. With a crooked grin, Baldo admitted he'd lost focus and told them to pick up where they left off. A nervous woman said the victims weren't just investors' families. Ordinary people were getting buried in debt and online gambling. He barked at someone to hold it together as debris whipped toward his face. Overwhelmed and hurt, Baldo screamed as he was hurled to the floor while Yoon-seok stared, stunned. Driven and merciless, Baldo buried a knife in a man's neck as the victim howled. A furious man in a suit lunged, but Baldo slipped away, saying there were plenty more to go. A glowing chain shot out and cinched around Baldo's throat. He choked in surprise. A hand yanked the beaded chain tight, sawing it hard. Baldo smashed his fist into Yoon-seok's face, beads scattering between them. Yoon-seok shouted a warning as Baldo caught the assailant's knife on the block. Baldo's fist cracked toward Yoon-seok's face again, brutal and fast. A sharp blur sliced the air, and a focused eye narrowed, ducking just in time. Footsteps rang out as someone stepped over two unconscious women, and the speaker revealed civilians were being drugged and sold off under fake debts. Baldo's blazing punch crashed into Yoon-seok's midsection, drawing a raw cry. He slammed onto the tatami, still clutching the knife in his fist. Catching his breath, Yoon-seok told him to pace himself. He was a dad now. Bloodied but steady, Baldo told his boss he owed a lot, and he was ready for whatever came. They gripped hands, trading jabs about never growing up, and the room eased with a laugh. Grinning, Baldo flipped a hammer behind his head and joked that everyone should probably look to their left. The boss yelled to attack now, and his men roared back that they were ready. A tense woman on her phone shouted for someone to hit back, demanding why Yongbin wasn't stopping the chaos as the restaurant exploded in violence. Purple-painted nails flew across a phone, firing off a warning. The group had arrived. A coal-dyed man with long black hair bragged the new product hit fast, and the latest video would rake in cash thanks to the girls' looks. Yoon-seok said the place was locked down tight because it served the elite, then told them to move as Baldo pushed ahead. Smirking, Baldo said he was impressed and asked how much more they planned to hype it. A phone screen blinked with a new alert, and the distracted man jolted. Word had come that the group was here. Baldo's eyes burned. Anyone coming for Sakura would die, he swore at the screen. Inside the Ambition Sports Club, a coach shouted for the trainees to power up. A trainer called out encouragement as a focused fighter worked his guard in a ring lined with trophies and medals. A heavy hitter crashed a fist into a hat-wearing opponent who cried for Hanseong and begged for a timeout. Yoon-seok told Baldo he needed more reps, impressed by how hard Baldo's right hand slammed even through the mitt. He added that Hanseong had a call, and Baldo said he got it. A hooded young man with bandaged hands picked up, asking if it was Yongbin. In shadow, a hand gripped the phone as a voice said the moment they'd discussed had finally come. A cigarette glints in the dark as a cold, commanding man orders Hanseong to finish the job at Sakura without hesitation. Inside the dim room, Yongbin, a muscular man in a dark suit, let out a long breath, feeling the weight lift as he gazed out the window. A young man with dark hair fixes his intense gaze on Baldo, tension thickening between them on the city street. A stern man holds up 3 fingers and tells Yongbin he has only 3 days. An apprehensive and cautious figure holds a cigarette between their lips, quietly admitting they have a bad feeling about what's coming. Yongbin, determined to proceed correctly, declares they'll do the job right, gripping their phone as the call with fixer service ends against the bustling city backdrop. Yongbin, calm and composed, introduces himself over the phone and asks how he can assist the caller at Lovely Pet Shop. A muscular, confident man smirks as he orders the Tibetan Mastiffs to head to Sakura right away over the phone. A group of men storms forward with weapons as their leader shouts for them to finish the job and take out their enemies. Baldo, a muscular and menacing combatant, thinks the comeback match is already proving tougher than he expected. Boldo, a concerned and strategic man, urgently offered a blood-stained knife to Yongbin and warned that things would get much worse if they caught him. Boldo gripped the blood-stained knife tightly and thanked his boss, steeling himself for whatever came next. Yongbin, a frustrated but still supportive side character, shouted that he didn't care anymore and told his teammates to handle the situation themselves. A cynical man flashed a sinister grin and told the other that they were both past their prime, prompting an urgent protest that now was not the time. Yongbin, injured but alert, urgently told Yoonseok the back door was nearby, while Yoonseok nervously asked why his name was suddenly being used. Boldo, a muscular combatant, taunted the others by telling anyone who was scared to go find somewhere safe. Boldo, a muscular combatant, slammed both swords together in front of his face, eyes blazing with determination. A hand, unseen but agile, yanked back a dark cloth with a swift motion. Yongbin, a young man with dark hair, recoiled in shock as he blurted out that he had no idea what was happening. He narrowed his eyes in intense focus, every muscle tensed and ready for what was about to come. Suddenly, an unseen attacker slashed Yongbin, and he cried out in pain. Yongbin, a wary and impressed observer, watched Boldo closely and muttered that he thought Boldo was actually pretty good. Boldo, a muscular and menacing combatant, launched himself down at Yongbin, Yoonseok, and the fighter, forcing them all to brace for impact. Boldo, a muscular and menacing combatant, drove his knife into the fighter, who recoiled and screamed in agony. One of the determined attackers shouted that they needed to drag Boldo down and that it would be over once he hit the ground. Yongbin, focused and intense, moved his fingers swiftly as a sharp whooshing sound sliced through the tense air. Pain flared as Yongbin, injured and in intense pain, cried out when a sharp, glowing slash cut across his face. Boldo attacked with a fierce strike, saying it was time to kick things up, while Yongbin eagerly told him he'd been waiting for that order. Yongbin, an experienced fighter with sharp instincts, braced himself as he endured a flurry of rapid blows and let out a short cry of pain. Boldo's intense gaze narrowed, and he privately wondered just how skilled his opponent truly was. Yongbin seized Boldo's shoulder from behind and told him he'd finally caught him. A heavy blow crashed down from above, the force shaking the ground with a deafening impact. A tense young man with dark hair gripped a bloody plank and demanded to know how long the unseen person planned to keep hiding. Boldo, a muscular fighter, hurled himself forward and struck downward with his wooden weapon as Yongbin and the other combatant locked swords. Tires screamed as a luxury car skidded to a halt under the harsh glow of city lights. Boldo, a muscular fighter in a green hoodie, slipped into the car and pulled the door closed behind him. Four hooded figures in dark green jackets gathered inside the building as their leader told them to finish the job quickly. A mysterious man stepped out of the car, the door slamming shut with a sharp metallic clunk. Boldo, the commanding leader, called out for the hooded figures to get to work. Shattered wood littered the ground as a nervous young man with dark hair crouched inside the ruined doorway, watching the destruction unfold. Yongbin, frustrated and standing alone in the night street, complained that his business had been completely trashed. An older man with glasses peered nervously from behind the door, calling out to see if Yongbin was there. Yongbin grabbed Mr. Lee's shoulders and pleaded for answers, insisting he'd invested heavily and offering money to help cover the damage for now. Then two hands clasped tightly, one adorned with rings and a watch, as a concerned voice quietly addressed the older man. Boldo, a muscular man with a stern voice, apologized to everyone and promised they would be compensated for today's disruption on their next visit. Yongbin, displeased and authoritative, told Mr. Lee he was disappointed with today's events and warned that a formal complaint would follow. Boldo, protective and responsible, told the older man Yongbin to use his car to get home. Yongbin, a fierce and determined fighter, ordered Yoonseok to escort the dean, and Yoonseok answered with a timid promise to follow his command. Yongbin bowed beside the car and wished the driver a safe journey as the hooded figures stood silently behind him. Moments later, Yongbin muttered a curse under his breath, frustration clear on his face. A clenched fist trembled against the wooden floor as the determined figure insisted nothing would stop them after sacrificing so much to get here. Boldo, a muscular and menacing combatant, clenched his teeth and vowed to bury the punks who trashed the building. Then, Yongbin ordered the hooded figures to shut down the establishment. Yongbin shouted for Boldo to stop, his voice cutting through the tension as the hammer hovered midair. Yongbin, alert and surprised by a hidden threat, realized he hadn't expected to face something this dangerous among his usual enemies. Boldo, injured but still defiant, offered Yongbin a deal and asked if the older man was interested. Yongbin, a confident and provocative challenger, pointed forward and told Buldo to forget the others and face him one-on-one for any prize. Yongbin clenched his fist and urgently warned Buldo not to trust the fighter, insisting this opponent was far from ordinary. Buldo, injured but resolute, raised his voice and announced it was time to end the games, calling for his boss to step in. A grim and resolute man told his opponent there would be no grudges, even if their fight left one of them dead or crippled. Yongbin, tactically commanding and cautious, told Seongti to stay out of the conflict no matter what happened, and Seongti nodded in agreement. Buldo, bold and confrontational, flung open his jacket and told everyone to grab whatever weapon they wanted if they thought they could take him. Buldo, a muscular man with dreadlocks, threatened his opponent and said he would break every single bone in their body. Buldo held the dark beads in his hand, remarking coldly that ending a promising athlete's career was the price for serving the wrong people. Buldo cracked his knuckles, declaring that he would take a limb as punishment and calling it accountability. Buldo leaned forward, fists clenched, and told his opponent it was time to stop talking and fight. A determined fighter with glowing eyes cracked his knuckles, warning his opponent that if he was so eager to die, he would gladly oblige. Buldo, a muscular and menacing combatant, felt a rush of excitement and nervously wondered aloud how long it had been since he felt this thrill. Buldo prepared to strike, thinking this real deathmatch offered a thrill no ring ever could. A single, wide-open eye pulsed with adrenaline as a powerful heartbeat thundered in the darkness. A single drop of sweat traced down Yongbin's face, his eye burning with focus as the tension hung thick in the air. Suddenly, a focused and intense eye flinched, revealing a split-second weakness in the heat of the standoff. Buldo, a fierce and aggressive fighter, hurled a powerful punch straight ahead with every muscle straining toward the target. Buldo's fist crashed into Yongbin's face, and Yongbin grunted in pain. Yongbin, a fierce and determined fighter, unleashed a rapid series of punches with unwavering aggression at his unseen opponent. A muscular fighter slammed his fist into Yongbin, who let out a sharp cry as he struggled to block the attack. Buldo, injured but fiercely determined, braced himself and muttered that he was ready to keep fighting. Yongbin blocked the attack with fierce determination, then scoffed that his opponent wasn't like the others he'd fought. An excited onlooker thought Yongbin was different and felt certain this fight would be incredible as Yongbin crouched in a fighting stance, gripping his bead bracelet. Buldo, a battle-worn and confident fighter, touched his bleeding mouth and quietly admitted he respected his opponent's strength after watching him train relentlessly. A hand reached out in silence, stopping just short of Yongbin's tentative fingers as tension filled the traditional room. A determined young man's eyes flashed as he wondered aloud what the other fighter was planning. Yongbin, a muscular and aggressive fighter, slammed his fist into Buldo's face, sending blood flying across the room. Yongbin, a fierce and determined fighter, raised his hand to his face and shouted that he couldn't see. Yongbin hammered his fist into Buldo, and Buldo let out a pained grunt. Yongbin, a fierce and determined fighter, shouted for his boss while gripping a knife as the fighter unleashed a flurry of punches at Buldo. Yongbin stared intensely at someone off-panel and demanded to know if they were a southpaw, prompting a surprised man to ask what he meant. A muscular fighter delivered rapid blows, forcing Yongbin to block defensively, as someone explained that Hanseong fought left-handed and used his right to distract. A fierce man with clenched teeth hammered out brutal strikes, while someone off-screen described how the real attack began the moment bodies hit the floor. Buldo, a muscular and menacing fighter, slammed his fist into Yongbin's face with a furious roar in the middle of their violent struggle. Buldo, determined and fierce, stared with bloodied intensity and thought the old playbook wouldn't work against this opponent, but a new strategy was forming. Buldo, a muscular and menacing fighter, moved in with a confident stance as he mocked Yongbin for trying to keep his distance and acknowledged his skill. Someone dashed forward across the wooden floor, their footsteps echoing as tension spiked in the air. Buldo, aggressive and powerful, drove his foot down with a swift, forceful kick that cut through the air. Yongbin, shocked and wide-eyed, let out a startled cry as the attack came closer than he expected. Yongbin, muscular and determined, threw up his guard just in time to block the sword aimed straight at at his face. Boldo hammered his fist into Yongbin, following up with a brutal kick as he shouted that this was the other man's greatest weakness. Boldo, still reeling, asked if Yongbin actually believed he could win as the aggressive young man lunged at him. A fist swung toward Yongbin's face as he yelled that he would never fall for the same cheap trick again. Yongbin covered his face with one hand, whispering in disbelief at what he had just witnessed. Boldo patted Yongbin's head and told him there are limits to what training can fix. Boldo, a muscular, menacing combatant, whispered fiercely that if Yongbin wanted a real fight, he was ready despite his injuries. A bloodied and fierce Yongbin clenched his fist, declaring that it was time to stop playing games and risk everything. Yongbin, a fierce and determined fighter, recoiled in shock as he realized someone had just lost. Yongbin stood battered and silent, his eyes fixed ahead while Boldo watched from behind with a faint, knowing smile. A figure crashed to the wooden floor with a heavy thud as another man stood nearby, unmoved by the impact. Yongbin rattled his prayer beads and announced that he would fulfill his promise. Yongbin gripped Boldo's arm tightly, the beaded bracelet pressing between their hands as tension crackled in the silent room. Boldo seized Yongbin's arm and declared he was taking it. Yongbin, angry and confrontational, charged forward with his fist raised and demanded to know what the other person was doing. Boldo pointed his bloodied knife and ordered them to stop. A young man with dark hair, bruised and bloodied, warned that no one should interfere after the duel and insisted they should be grateful he's still alive. Yongbin, an anxious young man, trembled as someone in the background assured the boss that everything was under control. Boldo slammed his fist into Yongbin's face and Yongbin screamed in pain. Yongbin rushed to Boldo as fighters closed in, shouting that Hanseong needed to move now. Yongbin, a young man with short brown hair, gestured for Boldo to follow and told him which way to go. A close-up of a focused, intense eye fills the frame as someone marvels that Boldo easily defeated Hanseong, calling his strength something entirely unexpected. A sudden shout cut through the tension as an unseen voice demanded everyone halt in front of the old building. A muscular man struggled as unknown figures pinned his arms, watched closely by a silent crowd of hooded onlookers. A close-up of Boldo's smirking mouth filled the frame as he mocked the food server, asking if this was really the guy everyone talked about. A bruised, bloodied man with long dark hair glared ahead as an unknown voice called him Yongbin Lee. Supported by two men, a battered Yongbin apologized and promised to handle things, while another fighter frantically called out for Hanseong. Yongbin, a man with long dark hair, unleashed a furious tirade and demanded to know why his opponent had failed and wasted his money. Boldo, a dominant and aggressive man, squeezed Yongbin's forehead and demanded to know why he treated the duel like a friendly match. A bloodied and bruised man grimaces in pain as an unseen attacker violently shakes him, hurling taunts about his failures and his crippled arm. Then Yongbin, the determined and wounded fighter, shook his fist and demanded that their unfinished business must be settled now. Yongbin, dominant and smug, patted Boldo on the head and told him their problems weren't over, blaming him for everything that happened. Yongbin, serious and threatening, warned the confused man that someone else would die because of him, leaving the hooded figures looming menacingly behind. A battered man with wild eyes begged the hooded figures for a chance to fix things, while Yongbin ordered someone to hold Hanseong Kang's arm. Suddenly, Yongbin was stabbed and screamed in fury, shouting that he hated hearing his name and never liked the attacker. A mechanical eye swept across the wooden planks, emitting a sharp electronic sound as it scanned the dim, tense scene. On a wall of security monitors, Yongbin, injured but unbroken, is watched closely, while files and a photo of Boldo rest on a cluttered desk. A digital grid flickered on screen, exposing the faces and ranks within the Hwangryong internal hierarchy. Portraits of Yongbin, a calm and intellectual young man, and Boldo, a serious and intense figure, appear beneath the heading Gongsu. A hooded figure, a mysterious and focused hacker, furiously types on a keyboard as blank computer monitors reflect the glow of the screens. Then, a persistent and investigative hand gripped the mouse as a printer spat out a restricted document marked with a bold "No Access" stamp. Boldo flipped a page of the document, muttering with suspicion as he studied the contents. Boldo wondered aloud why a simple gangster's file was restricted in the N.I.S. archive. An old, censored photograph sits atop a classified file as someone remarks that a notorious gangster is now under special government surveillance. Boldo, bloodied but confident, smiled to himself and said things had just become much more interesting. A serious man leans in, asking Huisu to confirm what he just said. A dominant figure looms over a bloodied hand and with a chilling tone announces that it is time to move forward. A blue-shaded, intense face stares down an equally fierce opponent, as one of them demands they finally have their talk. Yongbin, an intimidating aggressor, leans down and threatens the trembling figure, warning that he'll destroy everyone close to them for interfering with his business. A bruised man with clenched fists stared ahead, declaring that his opponent had abandoned their humanity. A close-up of intense eyes fills the frame as a shadowy figure orders someone to kill Boldo as painfully as possible. Boldo, fierce and bloodied, announced he would match the challenge without hesitation. Boldo tore through the armored enemy with a single brutal strike. Boldo's muscular arm twisted as dark, claw-like shadows cracked and spread across his skin. Yongbin, one of the hooded figures, closed in as Boldo, marked by a dragon tattoo, stood his ground against the looming threat.